today's webinar brought to you by OraSure Technologies. OraSure Technologies is a global leader in oral fluid substance abuse testing products. Unique assays provide accurate and easy-to-administer testing methods to help determine the presence or absence of drug or alcohol in a person's system. Oral fluid-based testing products provide a simplified collection process, faster results, cost savings, minimal risk of tampering, and dramatically reduced risk of adulteration. The Intercept Oral Fluid Drug Test is an FDA-cleared laboratory-based oral fluid drug testing system that enables accurate testing for drugs of abuse, including marijuana, cocaine, PCP, amphetamines, methamphetamines, barbiturates, benzodiazepines, and opiates. It was as the #1 recognized brand name in oral fluid testing in a 2015 National Drug Testing Industry Survey. With a fast and easy-to-administer collection process, Intercept is ideal for workplace, criminal justice, drug treatment centers, and clinical setting screening programs, among others. It is entitled Why Employers Should Drug Test for Marijuana, and it is the first part of a two-part series. The second part will be held on July 26th. Today's presentation will be presented by Bill Current and Nina French. Bill Current is the president and founding partner of the Current Consulting Group and publisher of the online Ultimate Guide to State Drug Testing Laws at statedrugtestinglaws.com. He is the author of 10 books on substance abuse-related issues, including the popular title, Why Drug Testing? CCG is a leading provider of drug testing policy writing services, working with companies to help them optimize their drug testing ROI. Bill is the former executive director of the American Council for Drug Education and vice president of consulting for Employee Information Services. French is partner and principal consultant at CCG. She has over 23 years of experience in this screening industry. She specializes in product design, vertical strategy, and business development. Nina consults with employers to design forward-thinking screening programs and screen companies to align their products with services in the key market. She consults on all aspects of drug testing and employee screening operations, including SNAP and compliance monitoring. In addition, her consulting specialties emphasize on helping employee screening providers streamline operations, launch products, increase revenue, and retain existing clients. It will now be our pleasure to hear from Bill Current and Nina French.
And welcome again to everybody who is on today's webinar. Nina, really excited about the topic that we have for today. I know you're hearing a lot about marijuana and legalization, how it's affecting the workplace, and you've even heard Nina and I give presentations on this subject before. We're going to approach this topic from a slightly different angle. We're going to present some information today that will definitely be helpful to you in terms of sort of how to address the issue as you face questions from clients, or if you're a buyer of drug testing, as you face the issue of whether or not you should continue testing for marijuana. We're going to talk about that. We're going to present some of the arguments that are used to promote legalization, and we're going to talk about how to respond to that. We're also going to talk about how it affects the workplace. We've got a lot of information in today's slide presentation, and we'll kind of breeze through different parts of it. But Nina and I decided to leave all the slides in so that you have all this information, even though we paused very long on some of the slides. Part 2, as Jessica referred to, which will be in July, we'll get more into sort of the nitty-gritty of how to put your policy together, how to choose the right drug testing method, comparing urine, hair, and oral fluid testing, lab-based oral fluid testing, I should say, as it pertains specifically to detecting marijuana, especially in a situation you may find yourself in where you're in a state that's legalized the drug. So we'll get into all of that. So let's look at some headlines that have just recently appeared in the media. Alcohol has killed thousands of people since the same pot use has killed zero since forever. That was a headline back in 2013, but it's sort of led to a whole series of media reports on this issue that are intended to frame the issue a certain way. So Ohio just passed the medical marijuana law. You see that second headline. The political hits out there, particularly those for president, are saying that they're going to legalize marijuana if they're elected. Marijuana is an issue Trump, Clinton, and voters can agree on. New law Colorado requires schools to adopt medical marijuana policies. And then a national report, this is a headline, national poll, majority supports legalizing marijuana. And that was from a week or so ago. We're going to turn that one in particular in a minute. But we've done our own poll here at the Current Consulting Group. We do a survey of the drug testing industry every year. We've been doing it since 1999, so we're coming up on our 18th now annual survey. I've been asking this question lately. We're going to ask it again in this year's survey. It's from 2014. What impact will legalized marijuana have on the drug testing industry? And we asked that question of drug testing professionals, third-party administrators, laboratories, consultants, ROs, etc. And 7.6% said employers are confused and worried about how to deal with marijuana in the workplace. Now, I'm not saying 67% of employers are confused, but 67% of testing professionals who participated in our survey said employers, who are their primary clients, said that employers are confused and worried about how to deal with marijuana in the workplace. And nearly 17% said that had clients, some employers, that have eliminated marijuana from their drug test panel. So these headlines and how issues being framed out there in society and in the media is starting to have a direct impact on the workplace as employers become confused about the issue. So let's talk about how it's being framed specifically with the reality and take it issue by issue. So let's go back to that national poll. Majority supports legalizing marijuana. That's a result of how the issue has been treated in the media. This is the YAC University poll that we found on the National Marijuana News website, TM website, which says that slightly more than half of the people who were surveyed, 54%, said the marijuana should be made legal across the country, while only 41% objected. Now, how it's being framed? Well, the second bullet shows how it's being framed along political lines. The vast majority of Democrats, according to this survey, support legalization. The vast majority of Republicans in this survey do not. And the vast majority of independent voters also back legalization. Look at that third bullet. It's also being issued or framed by the ages, by our age in society. The majority of registered voters younger than 65, and that's a big, giant gap there, right? 65 years. They would support legalization. Well, only 57%, still a majority, of those surveyed, 57% of those surveyed 65 and older said they would oppose it. So they're framing it by age. The next bullet, regarding whether people should be allowed to use medically prescribed marijuana, and I put prescribed in italics because, of course, marijuana is legal under federal law, therefore it cannot be prescribed. It can be recommended, and that's the language you typically find in a medical marijuana law in a state. 89% overall said they would be in favor of medical marijuana, and that's always been the issue from the very beginning. When there was no appetite for legalization generally, the legalization people started with the compassion argument to bring some passion, some healing, some comfort to those suffering from various illnesses, something as serious as cancer. And if you look at some of these laws, things just as sort of daily things like stress. That's what you find in some of these medical marijuana laws. And sort of appealing to that side of society, the vast majority of people say, yeah, I would be in favor of marijuana for medical use. But for the second bullet there, near share, 87% said Department of Veterans Affairs doctors should be able to prescribe marijuana in pill form in states where it is legal to veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder, while 9% said they should not be able to do so. Like juxtaposing the four against an area like this, where, of course, we veterans, especially those who are suffering from PTSD or PTS, to, have access to the things that they need. And of course, that's not really the issue, but that's how the issue is being framed. So that to be against marijuana would be kind of like being against puppies or kittens. It doesn't really make sense when you look at it on own merits, but when you compare it to certain situations, the issue is framed in a way that who might otherwise oppose legalization would say, yeah, I'm okay with that, even though it makes sense. Now, a PIAC poll that just came out. Here's a study that I put a little bit more weight in. It's Still, the majority of Americans are in favor of legalization, but this is the general social survey that has been coming out for many, many years. And see, the first time since 1975, according to this survey, a majority of Americans support legalization. And you see 52% in favor, 42% against. That's a huge jump, as you see in that third paragraph there. 25 years ago in 1990, just 16% of people favored legalization. Now, of course, the medical marijuana angle to the argument has sort of started to shift the public perception of the issue. And among young people, the risk of harm is also being affected by the way the issue is being framed in society. High school students' perception of risk associated with occasional marijuana use declined from 25% in 2010 to just 6% in 2014. Just as it's happening with synthetic marijuana like K2 and Spice, where you've seen a jump in the perceived risk of harm from 33% to 39%. But again, this is important. Perceived by young people, the levels of drug use, marijuana use in particular, going forward. These are people, of course, out there looking for their first part job. Sometimes they're right at school looking for their first full-time job. And perception of whether or not there's any harm associated with occasional marijuana use is starting to frame the issue going forward. And in fact, the pro-legalization folks, when they lose a battle to get marijuana legalized in the state, they'll always come back and assure you that it's just a matter of time, because they're really focused on the younger generation and getting them to be in a position where they don't really see harm in this. The issue then becomes, is harm in marijuana use? Can marijuana use be harmful to somebody's health, or safety, or to safety in general in our society? Is it in the workplace or to one's employment? We're going to address that now. But before we do, there's a few things that are important to know and to understand. We need to understand what marijuana today is like, how potent is it? We need to understand whether or not more people are using marijuana than prior to legalization. And also understand whether people testing positive, or whether that's leading to more people testing positive in the workplace. Because the argument to all of this is that marijuana is not harmful, it's a better drug, that legalization is not resulting in more people using the drug, and that it's not having a direct negative impact on the workplace. You'll find those arguments on legalization websites like the Marijuana Policy Project or NORML. So let's take a look at it for a minute. Very quickly. Potency. The potency of marijuana is determined by the percentage of THC that's in that particular marijuana. THC is the psychoactive ingredient found in marijuana that gives sort of the high effect of using marijuana. It's the thing that makes people feel good, feel light, feel happy, etc. So, studies shown, and this is one particular study, came out, as you see at the bottom of the page there, from NIDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse. That's a federal agency. Found that potency of today's marijuana has by a factor of 3 over the last 30 years. In other words, the study has found that today's marijuana is more potent than the marijuana that you may be with from the 70s or 80s. Just a year ago, for example, the potency was typically around 10%, or the THC content was about 10%. Today, it's around 30%. And direct impact on things like marijuana emergency room visits, the psychotic behavior of people who use marijuana, and its impact on the brain, which will come in a minute. It's important to know that cannabidiol levels, the CBD levels, that's the component in marijuana that some experts claim provides the medical benefit that is sort of the basis of the entire medical marijuana argument. The CBD levels have been going down at the same time the THC levels, or the potency levels, have been going up. And what this means is that the high somebody gets from smoking marijuana is going to vary from source to source, right? Because there's no FDA clearance for marijuana content. But as that goes up, as the users of marijuana are trying to create stronger and stronger strains of marijuana, time the potential medicinal effect, if there is one, and I realize everybody believes there is one, but that is going down. What people hope to get out of it from a medical standpoint is decreasing, while growers are focused on increasing the THC percentage in the marijuana that they're producing. So let's talk about that's affecting things, okay? Here's another survey. National survey finds dip in teen marijuana use, despite high legalization myth, and of course that comes from one of the pro-legalization websites. This was their report about a report that came out from the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC report, that marijuana use among teens over the last few years has been stable, steady, not really significant increase one way or the other, okay? But at the same time, this report was on some forms of risky behavior, as they call it, has found that cigarette and alcohol use among the same age group has been dropping. And so the pro-legalization folks are trying to find a way to make a connection between the fact that alcohol and cigarettes are legal and yet the use of teens is going down. Shouldn't that be the same if we legalize marijuana? Wouldn't that result in fewer teens using marijuana, as if they use it mostly because it's illegal? Here's it from the Director of Communications from the Marijuana Policy Project. We'd likely see similar results if we regulated marijuana in a similar fashion. We did not have to arrest hundreds of thousands of responsible adults, alcohol consumers each year, in order to reduce levels of teen drinking. So why is most of the country still taking that approach when it comes to preventing teen marijuana use? So if we legalize marijuana, fewer use it, just like with alcohol. What Mr. Evert doesn't want you to know is that marijuana has actually been going up. It's higher today than it was in 1991. And this report, the CDC report, comes out every year, or every other year. In 91, 93, 2005, 2007, 2009, it tends to fluctuate a little bit at a time. You can see it's much, much higher. Usage is much higher today than in 1991 and 1993. CDC says themselves, if you look at the charts where they show the year against year results of their study, they say the change in current marijuana use among high school students from 2013 to 2015 was statistically insignificant. That's the period of time in which the Marijuana Policy Project is claiming that marijuana use has gone down dramatically. But in the column where it shows up or down, what it says, according to the CDC, is that there has been no change. The statistic changed slightly, just for the pro-legalization folks to try to frame the issue that way. But the source of the study, the CDC, says there's statistically an insignificant change, no change, in fact. Let's look at a study that I really think is much more reliable. This is the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. This has been coming out since the 1970s, and it is the survey. It is the source of information on the magnitude of the drug problem. We're just going to report a few stats here, but if you went to that website and you see the address at the bottom of the page, and you'll get these slides so you don't have to write down. You get information in a multitude of categories. You can find almost anything you want. It'll break it down by gender, by ages, by parts of the country, etc. So if you know how it's affecting the Middle East, the Midwest versus the East versus the Southeast, the Southwest, etc., you can break it down that way, or you can break it down by state. In 2014, these are the results that were reported in 2015. An estimated 27 million Americans admitted that they were current illicit drug users. That was up from 23.9. So from 2014, as reported in 2015, the total number of current illicit drug users in the United States, those are people who used in the last month, went from nearly 24 million to 27 million. I think it was 0.2% to 10.2, somewhere 9.3 to 10.1, or 10.2 as you see there. That is what statisticians would call a statistically significant increase. And 22 million current illicit drug users who are adults, just 30% were employed. That is also a statistically significant increase in a one-year period of time. Among adults 18 and older who were unemployed, 18% were illicit drug users, the people who are applying for jobs with your company. Now here's an important number, 22.2 million, up from 19.8 million. That's the number of current marijuana users, 12, not just 18 and older, 12 and older. That is a statistically significant increase, according to the most reliable study that came out and has been coming out every year for over 30 years now. So from 19.8 to 22.9, from 7 to 8.4 is statistically significant. So we know that the period of time in which legalization is spread throughout the country, it is resulting in more people using marijuana. There's just no other way to look at it, despite how you might twist or turn any other sources of numbers that are out there. I'm not on this very long, but I just took one part, 17-year-olds and 18 to 25-year-olds, and these are the percentages that had been lifetime, past year, and past month users, 2012, 2013, and 2014. But you can see that in most categories, it's either the same over the last 3 years or up slightly. Now, according to SAMHSA, these are their words based on the statistics I just shared with you. Marijuana use is widespread among adolescents and young adults. To what the Marijuana Policy Project is saying about the CDC report. Monitoring the Future survey, another SAMHSA-sponsored paid-for survey, an annual survey of drug use and attitudes among the nation's middle and high school students. Most measures of marijuana use by 8th, 10th, and 12th graders have held steady in the past few years, following several years of increase in the previous decade. In other words, it's not going down. It's at least staying the same. Teens' perceptions of the risk of marijuana use have steadily declined over the past decade. Why? Possibly related to increasing public debate about legalizing or loosening restrictions on marijuana for medicinal or recreational use. In other words, the way the issue is being framed is impacting the perception of the risk of harm in using marijuana young people. It's using employers as to whether or not they have the right to test for marijuana, whether they have the right to discipline or terminate the employment of somebody who tests positive for marijuana. This is being framed in a way to get majority of people to say to themselves, there doesn't appear to be any risk of harm in using marijuana. There doesn't appear to be any negative impact or consequences from marijuana being legalized. So, well, that more people are using marijuana. We know that more people are testing positive, according to one major laboratory, tested for marijuana. This is from 2012 to 2013, at the same time that Colorado and Washington legalized marijuana, not just for medicinal purposes. They'd already done that, but legalized it for recreational use. That rate of positive drug test results in the workplace across the country increased 6% nationally, and 20% in Colorado and 23% in Washington. So when people are using the drug, we know that it's having a negative impact on the workplace because more people are actually testing positive in the workplace. Those are just statistics that you can't really argue with because they're real. And the question then becomes, well, what's harm in that? What's the problem with more people coming to work under the influence of marijuana? So we're going to talk about whether or not marijuana is harmful and in what ways it's harmful, and we'll make a direct connection to the place. So I'll turn the virtual microphone over to Nina at this point.
Thank you. Slide and talk today about, a little bit the flip side to what we're seeing in public opinion. Public opinion, we're seeing a trend that very much favors people thinking that marijuana, either recreational or medicinal, is harmless, and that it is, as Bill described it, sort of like puppies and kittens. It's harmless. It's why not do it? You have to like them. You have to like it. And talk about some information, some statistics that supports maybe a different opinion. And so we're going to start with just, is marijuana harmful? The short answer for that is yes, marijuana is harmful to your health. And there are volumes and volumes of statistics over 40 years, 50 years that study the effects, the impact of marijuana on the human body. We're going to talk about some today that is evidence to how it impacts users of marijuana. And Bill talked about two different types of users, right? So there's there's users, and there's habitual users. And so each of you on the call understands that the amount of use, how often you use it over how long of a period of time, is obviously going to have a cause or have an effect on what information we're going to go over in terms of the impact to your health. But in general, the chemicals travel bloodstream and they go to your brain. So it's go to your brain, and you're ingesting them in your system. The THC is the thing that makes you feel high, right? If you don't the THC, you don't. It's the heat that's going to make you feel high. So what are some of the effects you feel? And by the way, different people feel different effects. Different people feel different effects on minds. And different people feel different effects smoking different marijuana. So all these things are general categories where we know the impact of the health. But in general, thinking and trouble remembering. There is dry mouth or cotton mouth, and then everybody here knows sort of the idea of munchies or increased appetite. Now keep in mind that people on us. So if you have wasting disease, wasting issues from AIDS or from chemotherapy, sometimes it's used as an appetite to increase appetite on purpose, but it's very clearly one of the effects that you'll have from smoking it. Bloodshot eyes is sort of a telltale sign of smoking marijuana. Fast heart rate, slowed coordination. That idea of it mellowing you out is not a false idea. That's that sort of slowed coordination, slower or more trouble thinking or remembering. What are the effects on the brain? Research are finding that it can change the way your brain works overall. And again, the amount you use and how long you use it is going to impact the longer-term issues with the brain. But brain imaging of heavy marijuana users seen where it strongly impacts memory and attention. It actually changes the shape of the thalamus, which is the part of the brain that is involved in consciousness and information processing. On the next slide, we'll see, but that it's more impactful when the users of marijuana are teens and young adults because their brains have not finished forming. And so the impact of heavy drug use or heavy pot smoking on those is even more impactful. And then, they score lower than non-users on memory and attention and learning. The more they smoke, the worse it did. So again, those things that you are used to seeing that are, the stereotypical ideas of what happens when you are stoned they're true effects of marijuana on the brain. Being more pronounced in teenagers than in adults. And again, that's just because they're still forming their brains, and they're still, especially boys, that goes much later into their teens, girls oftentimes. And there's even studies that show that regular users are more likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia when there is schizophrenia in the family history. And pause here and note that we're talking about marijuana being harmful to one's health and the impact of marijuana. We're going to go into the lungs, but I'm also going to remind people that as we go through these slides, marijuana and marijuana production is not rated. So what is in each of those different strands that are being cultivated by each of those different growers, being sold by the different distribution companies, is known. And so like where you sit down and you look at the nutrition label on your Fig Newtons, or you look to see if something has been organically grown and processed, or if it was, a conventional growing process. Not things that are readily available to a marijuana smoker. And so the impact, how you are affected, and then the longer-term impact to your health, and to a large degree, is known. Have that, quote-unquote, nutrition label, knowing exactly what's in. each of the different that you buy of marijuana. So when we talk about the effect on the lungs, I know, the rumor when I was younger was always that smoking one joint was similar to smoking one pack of cigarettes, and the reason was, it's an unfiltered cigarette, right? And so that wasn't actually another thing that was very far from the truth. So marijuana smoke contains about 60 chemicals that are all called cannabinoids, and known of that is the THC. But it's also filled with a lot of the same chemicals that's in tobacco smoke. It's smoke, right? So it's ammonia, it's hydrogen cyanide, it's formaldehyde, things that you would never think of ingesting when you're smoking pot. And so to breathe it in through a water pipe, or you're going to breathe it in straight through your lungs through smoking a joint. And the effects of smoking that joint are very similar to what you see in tobacco use. There's no proof, theoretically, that it is lung cancer like smoking does. But, flip side of that, in a 2013 study in Cancer Causes and Control, they found heavy marijuana smoking might raise the risk of lung cancer. And again, what side of the fence you're on? This presentation today is meant to help you understand the issue and frame the discussion so that you can be educated having this discussion with other people. And when you're doing that, it just really makes sense, right? Smoking a pack of cigarettes has been proven that to be harmful. The more you smoke, the more harmful it is. The impact of the lungs really on your lungs can't be denied. I mean, all of us have lived in the world where we are paying for the long-term effects of the one tobacco use in the 50s and 60s where we didn't know there was an issue. And it holds true that very similar things, you're ingesting that smoke into your lungs, and we're going to see that as the studies continue, the risk of lung cancer is very likely to continue to increase. And then the other lung effects, are similar to what you see for smoking: coughing and wheezing and emphysema, and those symptoms that the doctors go to that can be attributed to marijuana smoking. Outside of the lungs, again, there's other health risks, anxiety, depression, fast heart rate, an increase of heart attack right after smoking, and then some suicidal thoughts in teens. And these are all well documented and vary, again, keeping in mind that this is not controlled in its distribution. And so the strain you're using and how it's cultivated could affect the long-term health and can affect the behavior of the person who smokes it. So then the next question is, so if we know that it's harmful to your health, is it harmful to your safety? And again, short answer is yes, it is harmful to your safety. And what's interesting about this is that there's a relatively new trend in terms of how it's being tracked. So we added in today's slides some crash statistics for 6 states that perform toxicology tests for fatal car wrecks. The one green, California, Hawaii, Illinois, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island, are ones where there is a form of legalized marijuana. In West Virginia, there is not. So these looked at 23,500 drivers from 1999 to 2010. Okay, who had to have died within 1 hour of a crash. Look at alcohol. So alcohol, over that same time period, about that decade, right? Alcohol contributed to about 40% of the traffic fatalities, right? What we know about marijuana, it was 16% in 1999, 16% of drug driving accounted for the fatalities in those states. But when to 2010, it turns to 20%. And so that's significant in the fact that the trend is continuing to increase, and it's increasing very quickly. So it's a 12% increase from 4% in 1999. And if you look just at Colorado, you see how significant the increase has been. In Colorado, it's sort of been the poster state for pro movement, and you'll see that from 2006 through 2014, the percentage of fatalities increased from 6.92% all the way up to 19.26%, and that's significant. Alcohol has not followed that same trend. It has been a plateau over that same time period, and pot-related, marijuana-related, drug-related, specifically for pot, has increased very dramatically over that same period of time. And finally, before I turn back over to Bill, is it harmful to one's workplace and employment? Well, I want you to, again, go off slides and talk about the health. Health is important. The cost of health care to employers is significant. You cannot open the newspaper or turn on the nightly news and not hear about the impact of health care and health care costs both to employers and individuals. And then we know that safety is a very costly and impactful issue for the workplace. And now we're going to say, is it harmful to the workplace and to employment? And again, the answer. So Bill talked about a study that we saw where the number of marijuana positives increased fairly dramatically. And you can see this when we look at the national average of positives for marijuana in just that 1 year period. Look at the difference between national average and Colorado and Washington. So as we see the number of states adding recreational and legalized marijuana increase, we're going to see this number increase across the board. And it's a little bit interesting that this number is going up so significantly, and yet we're seeing a trend of people saying, yeah, I'm in favor of smoking. I don't think it's an issue. And so we're seeing where that statistic and that mindset is impacting the positivity in the workplace. So they need to remember that of those 22 million current illicit drug users, 70% are employed full-time or part-time. So where are the people who are smoking pot? They're working for you. Going to get a job with you. So the who are age 18 or older who are unemployed is about 18%. And again, current drug use means within the past 30 days. So all of those different things combined to tell a tale that's a little bit different of where that trend is of seeing all of this positive attitude towards smoking marijuana. We're seeing the statistical evidence for health, cost, safety, very opposite story. So with that, I'm going to turn over to you on slide 47.
Okay, Nina, perfect. This is a slide that our good friend Joe McGuire, who's from Colorado, used in a presentation, a webinar that she did on medical marijuana, or the whole marijuana issue in Colorado. And she's really probably the foremost expert on the topic for Colorado and really the country as well. She used a slide and she gave us permission to use it. This is a picture outside of a marijuana dispensary, a legal place where you can legally purchase marijuana in Colorado. And interestingly, in the when the picture was taken, were 6 company trucks with company logos on them, and people standing in line wearing company shirts with their company's logos on them inside the marijuana dispensary in the day. So, in other words, if you're wondering whether or not legalization of marijuana is affecting whether or not people who work for you or work for your clients are using marijuana, well, this is just one anecdotal example of the fact that, yeah, right in the middle of the day, you've got employees who may be going to a legal marijuana dispensary to purchase marijuana legally. And to boot, your company's on full display there because company logo on their car or their truck, they have a logo on their shirt or their sweater, and they're in this place representing your company for all the world to see. Bad perhaps, but the fact remains that they're there using or purchasing marijuana to use, right? And some may be using that marijuana on their lunch break, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Lots of different ways in which drug abuse, not just marijuana, but any kind of drug abuse, but particularly marijuana, because that is by far the #1 drug of abuse in America. We saw that on a couple of previous slides. These are some of the ways that usage is impacting your workplace or the workplace of your clients. Every poor work to unexplained absences and tardyism that affects productivity, etc. And I was kind of pausing there in my head and sort of stammering a little bit because I was trying to think, is tardyism actually a word? It might be tardiness. We'll go with that. But it impacts the workplace directly. There's no way around it. And there's lots and lots of information out there. I went way back in time to find this study, a book back in 1990 or 91 called Does Drug Testing Work? And a compilation of all the studies and reports that were available at that time, a long time ago, right? This was timeless. Some statistics are timeless. If you're looking at a report that talks about the magnitude of the problem, how many people are using marijuana, well, that changes from year to year. And so you don't want to use something that's 25 years old to make your point today. But studies are timeless because they're about timeless issues. In this case, it's the impact of marijuana use on people who are in the workplace trying to do safety-sensitive jobs well under the influence. This study that was done a long time ago, 10 pilots around the age of 29 with hundreds of hours of flying experience, real flying experience, as well as history using marijuana. I don't know if it was hundreds of hours of smoking marijuana, but each of them had a history or experience using marijuana. They were tested in flight simulators before and after they smoked a single marijuana cigarette with 19 milligrams of THC. Now, measuring THC by milligrams is a little bit different than measuring it by percentage of THC that's in a strain of marijuana. But this was considered at the time to be sort of average, if not even below average in terms of its potency. In the were conducted 24 hours later, the group's performance showed, quote, trends toward impairment on all variables, with significant impairment in number and size of aileron changes, elevator changes, dips off center on landing, and vertical and lateral deviation on approach to landing. The quantity say the difficulty the subjects experience in aligning and landing precisely at the center runway, which is important to me when I'm flying on a plane, is a particular cause for concern. In flight, where there is wind and turbulence, such areas easily lead to crashes. In fact, one of the pilots did land off the runway 24 hours after using marijuana. The result should be of greatest concern to employers and to those who provide drug testing services is that none of the participants thought they were high. None of them thought that they were impaired or that their alertness or their performance was affected in any way by the marijuana they had quoted. So you see the source of the study there at the bottom of the page. The fact is, people who use marijuana cannot perform their jobs the same way that people who don't use marijuana perform their jobs, especially safety-sensitive jobs. I realize performance varies from person to person. It's a relative thing, etc. I know that. We know that. Everybody knows that. But the fact remains that people who are at work, land a plane, trying to drive a truck, trying to pallet of heavy material on a shelf using a forklift, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe the guy who's going to do your tax return or the guy who's going to try to get you a traffic ticket or something just don't have the same mental and sometimes physical motor skills under the influence of marijuana that they would otherwise have if they were not under the influence of marijuana. That bottom line. Marijuana health, absolutely, and that can affect costs in the workplace. Marijuana affects safety in the workplace and in society. Those crash results that Nina shared with you don't just apply to, people who are out for a Sunday drive. They're people who are driving trucks and delivery vans and other vehicles on behalf of their employers as well. It affects all parts of society, including the workplace. And when it affects the workplace, it can have an impact on an employer's bottom line. And as many years ago, sitting in a board meeting of high-level executives with Fortune 50 companies when I was the director of the Institute for a Drug-Free Workplace, the HR director for human resources for one of those companies, a very well-known company, I won't mention it, leaned to me and told me as one person after another was making a presentation on what was so great about their drug testing program in 1990 or 91 or 92, somewhere in that time frame, and all that we're doing for society and the artistic motives they have for setting up drug testing programs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He came over to me and he said, Bill, I was very young in business and some experience back in those days. He said, Bill, never forget that in business, the bottom line is always the bottom line. And so the legalization effort affects the bottom line. However you measure bottom line, but certainly as it comes to dollars and cents, there's just no way around it. Do not, marijuana is illegal under federal law. Why? Because it's a Schedule I controlled substance under the Controlled Substances Act of 1970. It's with heroin, with cocaine, and as a result of that, it cannot be prescribed. To be a Schedule I controlled substance means that there is no known medical use for the drug, and there's a high probability of abuse and addiction. Marijuana is in that category. The act of Congress, or perhaps an executive order from the president, which is not beyond possibility, right, to move it to Schedule I. Every Congress, which convenes every 2 years, right, U.S. Congress, there's always a bill proposing marijuana from Schedule I to Schedule II. There hasn't been an appetite for it yet, but again, how the issue is being framed only affects young people's perception of harm in using marijuana. It also eventually can affect the perception of harm among members of Congress, lawmakers. And so we could see that turn around. Scheduled drugs are considered dangerous drugs with no accepted medical use. This means that marijuana cannot be legally prescribed. That's why sometimes medical marijuana legislation goes down in flames, because they use that word prescribed in there and it gets the whole thing thrown out. What they'll do is use the term recommended. Marijuana may be recommended by a licensed physician or some other medical professional. And based on that recommendation, an individual can go into to the department within each state, it's different in each state, to register as a medical marijuana user, get a registration card, and show up at a dispensary and legally buy marijuana for medical purposes. There are marijuana laws that conflict with federal law. That's why you saw the Colorado Supreme Court rule against an individual who was suing his employer, in this case Dish Network, for fining him for testing positive marijuana. He was a registered medical marijuana user. This was before marijuana was legalized for recreational use in Colorado. But the Supreme Court of Colorado ultimately ruled. Now, this gentleman, Mr. Coates, lost at every level, but he appealed to the Colorado Supreme Court, which ruled that because it was illegal under federal law, you couldn't have a state law that conflicted with the federal. In other words, the federal law is always supposed to trump the state law. We've seen recently over the last few years that the government doesn't have an appetite to really go after these state marijuana laws, and so they're allowing these laws to exist. But state law can't conflict with a federal law. A federal law will almost always trump a state law. That's what the Colorado Supreme Court ruled, because they were going by the rule of law. They had no choice. Well, more challenges to that going forward. You can absolutely 100% bet on it. I'm going to touch on fluid just for just a few minutes. It's going to be part of the presentation next month when we talk about the different testing methods, and we'll get to the more practical issues of how to revise policy, how to insert into a policy specific marijuana language that is intended to make clear that an employer is taking advantage of the right to test for marijuana while also complying with any laws that may apply in the states where they do business. You have a variety of marijuana laws out there. No states have the exact same medical marijuana law. So in Illinois, it has drug testing language in their medical marijuana law. In Minnesota, it specifically prohibits an employer from discriminating against an individual who tests positive if they're a registered medical marijuana user, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to get into all of that. But one of the things that we're going to talk about, and this is really going to be, I think, on the right at the edge of the frontier of drug testing as we go forward into the next probably 5 to 10 years, this whole issue about lab-based oral fluid testing and its ability to detect THC or marijuana. Of course, that has largely been put to rest by the federal government. SAMHSA, as many of you know, has proposed guidelines now in the works for allowing lab-based oral fluid testing of federal agencies in compliance with federal law that requires them to do drug testing. That eventually be extended into areas like the U.S. Department of Transportation regulations, the energy. For years, employers have been mandated to do drug testing, but the only type of drug testing they're allowed to do is lab-based urine testing. We'll see the agencies that mandate testing of private sector employers change their regulations as SAMHSA finalizes its guidelines for lab-based oral fluid testing and puts fluid testing into 49 CFR Part 40. The truth of it is, the reason that is because, among other things, you can detect marijuana in lab-based oral fluid testing. There's no question about that. There's a difference, of course, in technology and the science between lab-based oral fluid testing and POCT fluid testing, and the detection is affected by those cutoff levels that are used, but can detect marijuana in oral fluid. The vast majority of positives are at a lower register of cutoff levels. You know, we cut off levels by nanograms per milliliter. Well, you can see that vertical dotted red line is at 50 nanograms per milliliter, and those blue bars are positives. The vast majority of positives for marijuana in oral fluid tests appear below 50 nanograms. In other words, if you're using a testing method that has a cutoff level above 50 nanograms per milliliter, then you're going to see very few positives. But at the lower levels, where you're, and really we're talking about below 20 nanograms per milliliter, and for that you're talking about lab-based oral fluid testing, that's where the majority of positive tests reside, below that level. So note on that, that's just the science that goes with it. Here's the real important issue when it comes to testing for marijuana, right? The cutoff levels for blood and oral fluid are very similar. They start right after the person's used a drug, within after an individual has used a drug, and it goes on for about 24 hours, thereabouts, give or take, depending on the drug, etc. Okay? You can see it doesn't start immediately after the person used that drug. The line is about an hour or two later, but the window opens up and it stays open a little bit longer with urine than it is with oral fluid, about 3 to 4 days. At the cutoffs that we're using, however, don't be fooled into thinking this, because I've seen it reported in the media. You're not going to get a positive drug test for somebody who last used marijuana 30 days ago. Not at these cutoff levels. Cutoff levels have a, they're widely used and regulated by most states and certainly by the federal government. That's of detection with urine about 3 to 4 days, maybe 5 days at the outset, sort of the outline of that. With oral fluid and blood, though, it's a shorter, tighter window of detection, but it starts immediately. And that's why it's important to consider the possibility of oral fluid testing in places where marijuana use has been legalized, because if somebody tests positive on a urine test, and certainly on a hair test, they claim that they last used the drug 5, 6, 7 days ago, 3, 4 ago. They're positive on Tuesday, and they say, well, the last time I used the drug was on Saturday night. And so you can't really make a connection between the accident they just caused, which triggered the post-accident test, as a result. But with oral fluid, if they test positive in a lab-based oral fluid test, that means they used marijuana probably within the last 24 hours and certainly within the last 8, 10, 12 hours. So if somebody comes back from their lunch break, marijuana smoke, and it triggers reasonable suspicion test according to your company's policy, and they test positive with a test, you can be that they positive shows that they used the drug within the last probably hour or two, because that's when the reasonable suspicion was triggered. You do that with other testing methods. You're certainly not going to use blood, which could do the same thing. It's just not practical, nor is it legal in many states for workplace testing. But it's going to happen with urine, and it's certainly not going to happen with hair. Which hair place? I'm a fan of both testing methods, but they don't coincide together. You'll see we're going to talk about this more next month. The positivity rate's very similar from oral fluid, which is the middle one there, the OraSure Intercept device, lab-based oral fluid testing, and urine testing. But go down to that white line about the fourth one down, THC, actually a little bit higher with lab-based oral fluid testing than with urine. Not perhaps a statistically significant difference, but it does spell this comment out there that one can't detect THC in oral fluid. Yes, you can, but two, you're not going to get significantly lower positivity rates with oral fluid than with urine, because The detection is going to catch some people on the front end, right, according to the data that we just showed, that you're not going to get with urine. And it's going to show, conversely, some positives on the back end of the window of detection with urine that you're going to possibly miss with oral fluid. So you want to have both methods working for you. So in conclusion, we come back next month, and Nina will be doing the presentation next month by herself about the practical aspect of drug testing for marijuana and making the case with your clients that they have the legal right to do it. We'll talk about respondeat superior laws, negligent hiring and retention laws, and we'll make the case for you so that you can then turn around to a client that's thinking about discontinuing testing for marijuana and show them how they do have the right to do that. Here's how to change your policy. Here are different testing methods that you may want to look at if you're in a state that's legalized marijuana, so that they can continue to get the benefit of testing without giving up testing for marijuana. And that's part of today's presentation. So let me turn the microphone back over to Jessica and to all of you for joining today's webinar, and let you know that if you have any questions that we haven't been able to get to, that we didn't cover in today's presentation, we'll be happy to respond to a phone call or an email and get that information out to you. Jess is now going to tell you how you can access the information that we shared today after today's presentation is over. Thank you.
And thank you, Nina. On behalf of OraSure Technologies, we hope you have found today's presentation informative and helpful. This presentation was recorded, and you will receive instructions informing you how to access the recording. This one of a two-part series. The second part of the series will be presented on July 26th, and registration information will be included in the follow-up email that will have the recording to today's webinar. Thank you for your attendance, and this concludes today's webinar.